Have you ever wondered what dark secrets might be lurking just next door? Imagine your seemingly ordinary neighbor is hiding a terrifying truth, one that could change everything you thought you knew about them. These real-life horror stories will make you rethink the people living right beside you. It was a quiet afternoon when Jack returned home early from work, his footsteps echoing through the stillness of the house. He had been working remotely for the past few months, and although the solitude was something he had grown accustomed to, today felt different. Today, the silence was almost too perfect, an unsettling calm that seemed to stretch on far too long. The kind of silence that presses on your ears and makes your pulse quicken, yet no sound seems out of place. As Jack closed the door behind him, he paused for a moment, unsure of what was wrong. The house was still, but it was a stillness that felt as though something had been taken from it, something vital. The usual hum of the fridge, the faint whir of the ceiling fan, even the soft ticking of the old clock on the wall, all of it was gone. Jack shook off the strange feeling, convincing himself it was just the pressure of work weighing on his mind. He stepped into the living room, his eyes scanning the familiar surroundings, hoping that a glance at his cluttered desk or the bookshelf lined with novels would ease the sense of foreboding. But then, as his gaze fell across the far corner of the room, something moved. A shadow, a flicker that didn't make sense. For a split second, it appeared to slither across the wall like smoke. Jack's heart skipped. His breath caught in his throat, but he shook his head, telling himself it was just a trick of the light, the result of the sunlight streaming through the window at an odd angle. But something about it didn't sit right. His pulse quickened, and his eyes darted across the room, but the shadow was gone. The silence, however, was still heavy, almost suffocating. Jack slowly sank into the couch, his mind racing, trying to understand what was happening. He couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong, something just beneath the surface, waiting to be uncovered. But he couldn't put his finger on it. As the hours passed, Jack's discomfort grew, like an itch he couldn't scratch. He couldn't focus on his work. Every small sound seemed amplified in the quiet, every creak of the floorboards, every rattle of the windows, every slight shift in the air. His eyes kept drifting to the shadows, to the corners of the room, where the light never quite reached. But it was when he heard the faintest scrape of something barely audible, like the sound of a foot sliding across the floor, that the panic truly set in. He froze, staring at the empty hallway, his muscles tensing. A chill ran down his spine. Someone else is in here, he thought. There's no one else here, but someone is here. His eyes darted to the staircase. And there, standing motionless on the landing, was a figure, a shadowed shape. For a brief moment, Jack's mind struggled to process what he was seeing. The figure was tall, unmoving, its features indistinct in the low light. It was as though it was waiting for something, waiting for him. Jack's breath hitched. His feet felt rooted to the floor, and his heart pounded in his chest. He should have called out, but his voice was frozen. His eyes stayed locked on the figure, and for a fleeting moment, he swore it tilted its head slightly, almost as if it were aware of his gaze. He blinked, but when he opened his eyes again, the figure was gone. Vanished, leaving only the empty stairwell behind. The house had returned to its unnatural silence, but now it felt colder, more empty. Am I losing my mind? Jack asked himself, trying to convince himself that it was nothing more than a trick of the light. But the sensation of being watched didn't fade. He could still feel those invisible eyes on him, following his every move, making the walls feel as if they were closing in around him. The unease in the house was palpable now, like a living thing, lurking in every corner, every room. The pressure of it weighed on Jack's chest, each breath more difficult to take. He tried to focus on his work, but it was impossible. The shadows in the corners of his vision grew darker, more defined, as if they were moving closer, inching towards him with every passing second. The sound of footsteps creaking in the hallway seemed to grow louder. But when he looked, there was no one there. No one, except the darkness. The darkening corners of the house seemed to pull at him, beckoning him into them, promising to reveal something he wasn't ready to see. Jack stood up, pacing the living room, his nerves fraying. He was on edge, his mind spinning. The house, once his sanctuary, now felt like a prison. Every small noise sent him into a panic, every shadow a potential threat. His eyes scanned the walls, the doorways, the windows, looking for something, anything that would make sense of the chaos in his mind. But there was nothing. Then, from the corner of his eye, he saw it again, a figure, a shadow, standing at the top of the stairs. This time, Jack didn't freeze. He moved toward it, each step deliberate, but his feet felt like they were sinking into the floor, as though the house was dragging him down. The figure remained motionless, its shape more defined now, but still formless, still indistinct. Jack could feel his heart thudding in his chest, a constant drumbeat of fear. He opened his mouth to call out, but no sound came. His throat was dry, his breath shallow, his mind locked in terror. He took a step closer, then another. The figure didn't move. It was just there, waiting, watching. He reached out a hand, his fingers trembling. And then, in a blur, the figure was gone. Vanished, just like before. Jack's heart pounded in his chest. He spun around, searching for any sign of it. He grabbed his phone, his fingers shaking as he tried to call someone, anyone. But the phone slipped from his hand, clattering to the floor as the world around him seemed to spin. The silence in the house was deafening, pressing in on him from all sides. The panic reached its peak, like a wave crashing over him. Jack couldn't breathe, couldn't think. His mind was spiraling out of control. He had to confront it, whatever it was. He had to face the figure, to end this madness. With every step he took toward the stairs, his heart beat louder in his chest. He didn't know what he expected to find, but he was desperate. When he reached the top of the stairs, his eyes fell upon the figure once more. And then, just as he was about to shout out, he froze. The figure wasn't a stranger. It wasn't an intruder. It was her, his girlfriend. But how? Why was she here? She had told him she was working late. He had been waiting for her text. Why is she standing there, silent, unmoving, in the dark? The truth hit him like a ton of bricks, and his mind couldn't comprehend it. She was there, but she wasn't supposed to be. He could see her clearly now, but she was eerily still, her face unreadable, her eyes hollow. It wasn't just confusion now, it was a suffocating realization. It wasn't a ghost. It wasn't an intruder. It was his own mind. It was the deep-rooted anxiety, the uncertainty, the isolation he had been pushing aside for so long. The darkness had not come from the house, it had come from within him. The figure in the house, the shadow that had haunted him, it had been a manifestation of his own fear. His own anxiety had taken shape, filling the empty spaces in his mind, creating something that wasn't real but felt more real than anything else. Jack's knees buckled, and he collapsed to the floor, unable to process the truth. The shadows in his mind had come to life, and now they were all he could see. The house was not haunted by a ghost. It was haunted by his own psyche, a reflection of his deepest fears and insecurities. And no matter how hard he tried, he couldn't escape the terror within himself. It was one of those still, quiet evenings when time seemed to slow. The sun had dipped below the horizon, leaving only the remnants of daylight flickering in the sky as Lucas sat on his porch, watching children's laughter echoing from the street. Their carefree voices bounced off the walls of the neighborhood, a stark contrast to the heavy silence that often surrounded him in his solitude. He wasn't used to this kind of peace. Solitude felt almost like an old companion. Still, something about tonight felt different. Lucas' gaze drifted across the yard. The air was thick with the sounds of distant birds settling into trees, the rustling of leaves, and the soft hum of the breeze. The world felt strangely calm, yet there was an unsettling stillness in the air. As his eyes moved to the far end of the yard, something caught his attention: a shadow. It was the figure of a man, crouched low, digging a hole in the middle of the lawn. At first, Lucas thought nothing of it. Maybe it was a neighbor, working late into the night for some odd reason. But the man's actions were too deliberate, too quiet. The rhythmic scrape of the shovel against the earth was almost hypnotic, but something about it unsettled Lucas. It wasn't the kind of task someone would choose to do after dark. And why this spot, at this hour? Why wasn't he in the backyard or somewhere less visible? Lucas squinted. The man hadn't even acknowledged his presence. That was strange. Why was he out there digging a hole in the middle of the night, in such isolation? A rush of confusion swept through him. Something didn't add up. He tried to convince himself it was nothing, just a random, strange thing. But the unease gnawed at him, settling deep in his gut. The longer Lucas watched, the more questions began to bubble in his mind. Why did the man seem so intent on digging, his focus absolute? It felt wrong. The more he looked at the stranger, the more that eerie feeling of wrongness clung to him like a shadow. Lucas tried to shake off the discomfort creeping into his thoughts, but it only grew stronger. The man never stopped digging, not even for a second. The earth around him was being disturbed, dirt spilling from the hole like a slow, deliberate release of something buried deep beneath the surface. The action itself felt symbolic. But what was it? Why did it feel like something ominous was unfolding just beneath his eyes? The world around him had gone silent. The children's laughter was replaced by an almost unnatural quiet, and even the wind seemed to hold its breath. It was as if the night itself had paused, waiting for something, waiting for him to make a move. Lucas' pulse quickened, the beat of his heart pounding louder in his ears, drowning out everything else. He shifted uncomfortably in his chair. His legs felt stiff, heavy, as if the air had thickened. He told himself it was just his imagination running wild. But the sense of discomfort wouldn't let up. He couldn't stop watching. The figure continued to dig, his movements smooth and methodical, yet there was a coldness in the air that made every shovel of dirt feel heavier than the last. It was as if the man knew Lucas was there, yet he remained completely unaware, or worse, unconcerned. The lack of any kind of acknowledgement, the absence of a reaction, made the entire situation feel even more unnatural. And that was when the true fear set in. What if he wasn't supposed to be there at all? What if the man digging wasn't meant to be in this world? What if he was part of something Lucas was never meant to understand? Lucas' stomach twisted with unease, the pit growing deeper with every passing minute. The figure in the yard became an enigma, a symbol of something far more sinister that lurked just beyond his comprehension. It was no longer just a man digging in the yard. It was a puzzle with pieces Lucas didn't know how to fit together. And the more he tried to make sense of it, the more terrified he became. His instincts screamed at him to turn away, to retreat into the safety of his home and lock the door behind him. But something deep inside urged him forward, toward the figure. He couldn't explain it, but he was drawn to the scene, unable to tear his gaze away. He needed answers, no matter the cost. Lucas stood up, his legs feeling shaky, unsteady. The world around him seemed to darken as he moved closer, and the once quiet night began to close in on him. The shadows in the yard lengthened, growing taller with each step. The distance between him and the figure seemed to stretch, as if the yard was longer than it had been moments ago. He was halfway across the yard before he realized that every step felt heavier, as though the ground itself was holding him back. The wind had stopped entirely, and all Lucas could hear was the rhythmic sound of the shovel scraping against the dirt. It was so loud, so methodical, that it began to feel like an unspoken challenge. Why are you here? His heart raced faster with every step, the unease swirling into something darker. He knew he should turn back, but he couldn't. The man in the yard, with his unblinking, tireless movements, had an aura that was almost hypnotic. The closer Lucas got, the more his instincts screamed at him to run, but he couldn't move. He reached the edge of the yard. The figure hadn't moved, hadn't stopped. Lucas was so close now that he could hear the faint sound of breathing, shallow but steady. The stranger didn't acknowledge him. He didn't look up. It was as though Lucas wasn't even there. The stranger continued his work, digging deeper, the hole growing wider. Lucas wanted to speak. He wanted to shout. To ask the man what he was doing. But the words died in his throat. A coldness ran through him, paralyzing his limbs. His body wanted to flee, to escape, but his mind couldn't look away. And then, in the silence that followed, the man stopped digging. He paused, turning the shovel slowly in his hands, as if preparing to speak. The air hung heavy. "You shouldn't have come," the stranger's voice rasped, low and guttural. The words cut through the stillness like a blade. The shock of those words hit Lucas harder than anything else in that moment. Why shouldn't I have come? What had he walked into? What had he uncovered? Lucas' legs nearly gave out beneath him. The man hadn't turned around, he just stood there, unmoving. There was something chilling in the way he held his shovel. It wasn't a threat, it was a warning. But a warning for what? What had Lucas gotten himself into? The stranger's voice came again, colder this time, tinged with something darker. "You're part of it now. There's no turning back." The words hung in the air like a curse. Lucas' pulse pounded in his ears, his breathing shallow and erratic. The cold sweat that dripped down his back felt like ice against his skin. He wanted to run, to flee, but his legs wouldn't move. He was trapped in the moment. The stranger turned, his face still hidden in shadow, but the smile that twisted across his lips made Lucas' blood run cold. "This is just the beginning," he whispered, stepping aside, revealing what lay in the hole. Lucas' heart stopped. It wasn't just a hole. It was a grave. A shallow grave, but a grave nonetheless. The earth was disturbed, the dirt still fresh, but it wasn't empty. Something lay beneath. The very sight of it filled Lucas with terror. This wasn't just a hole, it was part of something much, much larger. Before he could react, the man spoke once more. "You'll see. You're already here, already part of this. Now, you'll never leave." The world around Lucas shifted, as if the ground beneath him was slowly swallowing him whole. His vision blurred, and he could feel himself being drawn in, pulled toward the grave. It was no longer just a hole, it was a symbol of his entrapment. The sound of the shovel falling, striking the earth once more, filled his ears as the world collapsed around him. And just like that, Lucas realized that this was only the beginning.